Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about 5G strategies, 5G implementations. We're just talking about observability as another element, which is interesting. John, I'm going to throw it over to you. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight from where you all sit for the listening audience.
Sure thing, Luke. And you and Dan talking about security of 5G is music to my ears.
I figured as much.
Well, here's what we're seeing from a 5G security perspective in terms of successful programs. Because of the mission criticality of 5G, the approach to securing it is going to have to be much more sophisticated, enterprise grade, if you will, than security may have been sufficient for previous generations. The proliferation of devices, the vast increase in intelligence at the network edge, and the aggregation of critical functionality at the network core bring out challenges that together contribute really to a perfect storm of security risk in 5G deployments in all the categories that Dan just talked about. The applications and services that ride on 5G networks are just as critical to secure as the network infrastructure itself. So to be successful, government organizations and companies in the critical infrastructure sector need to establish strong security posture that can stop cyber attackers from infiltrating the networks, disrupting critical services, or destroying industrial assets. In mission critical industries, security breaches are going to cost more than just downtime, lost revenue, and maybe even tarnished brands. They can put human lives in jeopardy. So that's why I believe that baking security in upfront to all the promise that 5G provides is so important to a successful program.
Sure. And, there's elements of the security built into this technology, undoubtedly, but there's no question. I'm thinking about the various what you face when you just come up and show up to an open river and drop a bridge in there, right? The attack surface associated to that sort of environment from a technological standpoint must be incredible. So anyway, why don't you give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight in regards to an implementation? Doesn't have to be a bridge, by the way.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of interesting things as it pertains to the deployment of 5G. But I think one of the things that we would highlight from a Corps of Engineers perspective is really we've built a cyber center of excellence centered around the operational technology component. That is a area that's not really highly spoken of, even though it is probably one of the more critical functions. And with that being said, we have worked with many different mission partners, whether that's CISA, the Army Cyber, U.S. Cyber Command. We've hosted many cybersecurity exercises as well. And as it pertains to that center of excellence, we begin to build this environment from an operational technology perspective that allows us to assess 5G technology, as well as different concepts such as zero trust and many others. Now, when you think about it, why is that important? Because within this cybersecurity center of excellence, from an operational technology perspective, these are the same technical capabilities that will allow us to secure as well as operate efficiently when managing and maintaining things such as levees, locks, dams, many different infrastructure, critical waterways, and those type of things. From a Corps of Engineers perspective, we are the construction agent for not just the Army, but also DOD, and we build on many camp posts and stations as well. So a lot of things such as installations of the future and many other things, we actually provide a lot of helpful insight into how to properly build those. So I think that Cyber Center of Excellence has really allowed us to be able to look at full spectrum operations and many other things. And it's also allowed us to be able to assess operational technology through the leveraging of 5G technical capabilities. And we've seen a lot of success as well as challenges. And I think that's one of the good things that we are proud of being able not just to implement, deploy, but also to sustain and be able to leverage throughout the rest of the department going forward.
A really important part of the operational implementation is ensuring it's hardening from a cyber standpoint. That sounds like a fantastic. How long has that center been in place?
It's been in place now probably for about 18 months.
Okay.
18 months ago, it's out in Branson, Missouri. Phil Copeland is leading that charge for us, and he's doing a very good job from a civil works perspective. So it's been out for about 18 months now.
Great idea, and something perhaps other agencies should look at perhaps modeling it. Brian, how about at Verizon in regards to a lot of different activity? You're seeing it from a standpoint of striping across all these various agencies, the private sector as well. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to bring to the light here.
Yeah, I want to go off of what Dr. Massey said. So one of the things that I'm working on and working with our team, lab team. So we're very excited. In October of 21, we kicked off our Boston facility, which is a lab downtown. And this actually mimics probably around 90% of what our network does today, where we actually give it availability to customers to test, right? So multiple vendors, multiple core vendors, multiple MEC providers, private networks, commercial networks. More importantly, we just set up our quantum key distribution network that will support 5G. So it actually gives the ability for agencies to come into the facility and actually do testing on a real wide network, but more importantly, you can manipulate the network, right? You're not tearing it down or actually adversely affecting the commercial network, right? So having that ability to actually do that in a confined space is very exciting. A lot of agencies are very interested, so you can get raw data and actually how a device interacts in the network. And more importantly, as Dr. Massey said, what kind of showings are actually being seen on the network for that particular device. So that is actually in a lab environment. And more excitingly, with using our commercial network in the spirit of the DoD at the Miramar location there with Major Harvey, we're going to conduct some experiments later this year where we're actually going to do some real testing. And actually, as they deploy autonomous vehicles, drones, and vehicles themselves, they're actually curious to see actually how it interacts on the actual commercial network. What kind of data is actually shown or emitted. And we're very excited to actually kick off that project the second part of this year going into 2023, right? So that's probably the biggest thing that we start to get from agencies and actually from a research and engineering. How does it actually work through a mobile network operator like Verizon and actually providing some information, which we're excited to, it's new for us, and actually kicking off the labs. And the last thing I'll leave on, Luke, is we're very excited about 5G, but also 4G is going to be around for a very long time, right? So when we talk about 5G, AR, VR, right, that's high bandwidth, when we talk about 5G and IoT, a lot of those devices will not actually use a lot of bandwidth, right? So you can imagine if you're a war fighter, right, actually weaving in chips into BDUs or boots or tools, right, non-electrical tools like shovels, right, picks, right? So as Army Corps of Engineers, so you're going to see a lot more tracking of devices that are going to use the greater 5G ecosystem, but also you're going to use the 4G. So when you talk about like things like narrowband IoT or Cat M1 networks on LTE, there's going to be millions of those devices, if not billions, being tracked. They'll actually fall into the 5G ecosystem.
No doubt about that. And that's a good catch. I'm sure that's going to be technology will be here for a considerable amount of time. Rob, I want to start with you, and we're going to talk about priorities. I know you've got a lot of moving parts. You talked about a couple of things. I always like to focus on top priorities in the job jar for this year. What were you all trying to sort of pin down or make sure it's well underway by the time this year ends?
So there's really three things. So from an enterprise perspective, like was mentioned earlier, the opportunity to lease initiative where we're trying to bring 5G capabilities to all of the bases across the continental U.S. We want to really make some serious headway on that. We should be about 2/3 of the way, at least have the leases in place, if not have actual implementations in place by the end of the year moving forward. So we're trying to pick up some momentum. We were pretty slow the first couple of years. Brian can attest to some of those issues that we ran across. COVID certainly didn't help. It's really hard to do site visits when you're locked down. Number two, we really want to continue our partnership with DoD on the many experiments that are out there. Tremendous information being gleaned from that. Opportunities not just to learn, but also to take some of those capabilities and actually roll them into existing programs. And then lastly, it's getting real hardcore use cases. So it's 5G in and of itself is not a requirement. It's a solution to a requirement, and it's getting out there and defining what are the real mission requirements so we understand where 5G should be prioritized and how it should be implemented, because 5G is so much more than my phone having faster speed. It is, as was mentioned earlier, the edge computing. It's the tremendous density to improve IoTs and sensor devices out there. It's all of those things. It's really less about the consumer and more about the mission itself and the great capability that it brings to us.
No question. A lot of machine to machine capability certainly gets unlocked with this type of technology. Stephen, I can't imagine the amount of activity that's going on right now in regards to what you all do and the advent of all this technology, particularly this getting embedded in these various types of devices. What's on the top of the priority list for you all? What's the demand signal that you're seeing?
I think there's three big areas here. I mean, the first is around that evolution to the standalone, so 5G, with bringing the new core network in, and that's really about enabling new use cases towards the enterprise sector and enabling capabilities for sort of government and defence. And on the back of that comes the Release 16 standards upgrades. So most of the networks today are based on the Release 15 standards. 16 was frozen about 18 months ago, and the first first commercial systems are starting to become available. So we want to see those get out into the market because they bring many of those capabilities which are going to be critical for security, for low latency. The secondary area is really around the intersection with the cloud and the edge. To that sort of what Dr. Massey mentioned about the operate through side of it. How could, as an industry, we utilize the public cloud for better security, data privacy, localization, and also for latency use cases? And a big challenge, what we're seeing at the moment, is how do we guarantee consistently low latency when we use these edge networks? Because it's no good if the latency fluctuates, especially if you're doing, say, an augmented reality types of application. Because if the latency fluctuates too much, you get seasick, and it's not a very usable service. And the last area, which I think is becoming a major focus now for a lot of our customers, is around private networks. There's a large focus from the government in many of our markets in terms of pushing towards enterprises to start thinking about how to adopt 5G within the private networking environments. I think we see it at the moment, especially in the West here, there's a big risk. Asia and China certainly are very aggressive in this momentum with their Set Sail program. Focusing on trying to be a leader in sort of in 5G within manufacturing and the industrial sector to give them sort of economic leadership. And I think a big focus now we're seeing from a lot of our Western customers is really a drive to actually not be left behind. And again, this is very much about trying to understand how do we get a 5G private network deployed? How do we coexist in an environment where we maybe have other technologies like Wi-Fi, potentially even integrating into non-terrestrial networks with the low Earth orbit satellite technologies as well. So these are some of the big areas that we're prioritizing at the moment.
No question. And how do you snap into a commercial environment or go sort of up and down to 4G, up to internal wireless, et cetera? I'm sure, no question, very complicated. The various, I think about the things that, no question, that you are facing in those type of scenarios. But what's on the top of the list for you all this year to try to make sure that you get the tracks laid down on?
Yeah, so we're beginning to look at the ensuring that the cybersecurity challenge are always at the forefront. I think we're beginning to also look at cost, because with every technology and every implementation, there's always cost, and the reality is 5G is not cheap. When you begin to look at the various implementations, as well as the different nuances, parts, and pieces that are required in order to properly implement it, because you're building on top of different technology. 3G goes to 4G, 4G goes to 5G, but then you have other many different pieces in order to make that work as well. So we're beginning to assess the financial landscape and the responsibility that is required as well. We're also beginning to look at our back-end infrastructure and networks, because with 5G, there's a significant amount of fiber that needs to be laid as well in order for that to be successful. And when it comes to laying fiber, that also requires a significant financial responsibility also. So the funds are definitely something that we're definitely looking to enhance. Granted, within the government, you have to be very strategic when it comes to future planning. So for this fiscal year coming up, we're definitely putting a lot of emphasis in that, and definitely looking at the cyber challenges and risks that are associated with it. That is continuously as we continue to go. So a lot of good things moving, but definitely putting emphasis on being able to get the financial assistance to be able to help us continue to evolve.
A lot of interesting angles there. So I appreciate you highlighting this. Brian, How about at Verizon? You're working on a lot of various activities in regards to 5G, implementing it, including what we talked about with the Air Force. What's on the top of the priority list for Verizon for this year for 5G?
Number one priority is building out the network and actually implementing our C-band acquisition. So as new licenses come from the FCC, we're actually aggressively rolling that out. One thing too that we always talk about now, it's new and it's great, is on the mid-band. We're still actively rolling out millimeter wave, right? We see huge demand on millimeter wave. We're very excited about it. A lot of the use cases out there, obviously it doesn't propagate far as wide as the mid-band spectrum, but if you're talking about a warehouse for a Defense Logistics Agency or Army Corps of Engineers, millimeter wave, we're very excited with, for instance, the Veterans Administration in Palo Alto, where we have a 5G surgical center working with companies like Microsoft and Metavis, where we're doing 3D imaging, right, which makes sense. But also looking at a VA complex where we will actually deploy 5G millimeter wave in certain areas, but also have 5G mid-band actually outside of the hospital or indoors, and then also 4G technology. So building out infrastructure is probably the biggest thing going on for us right now, because we, as you can imagine, we have many use cases. It's not just the devices themselves, but there's a huge broadband initiative that we see in 5G, what we call fixed wireless access, as a huge catalyst for us. Some things as we go into the end to kind of whet the appetite a little bit here. Luke, you're always pushing the envelope to see what we get out of us. We're looking at release 16, obviously in 5G standalone core. So we're doing some testing as we go right now. So you'll see some stuff from us going into the end of this year, going into 23. We'll bring into things like network slicing. And I would say the other big thing that we're starting to see a big push, probably picking up, but we're starting to pick up now and going into the end of this year in 23, a lot more private network builds. Right, so we have customers, government as well as enterprise customers looking to deploy private networks today, which I think is very exciting for us. So a lot of good things in growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting angle, right? When you hear about these private networks and you're thinking about the various of pointing out the costs, et cetera, who better to build that than the folks that do this sort of across the globe, but do these sort of special environments. It sounds like you're doing something like that in the Air Force at those bases, perhaps. All right, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.